Welcome back to Story Glimpse, Season 1. Today we're going to read a story I titled Hunger. Get ready. Welcome back to Story Glimpse. I'm Weston Kincade, supernatural and horror author, and today we're going to get started by reading a story titled Hunger. English Indiana wasn't the best place to be after the sickness rolled through. Hell, it wasn't a happening place before. However, for 3 people venturing across country after the outbreak, it was as good as any. Unfortunately, they were running low on food, and it didn't appear as though much remained in the outskirts of the rundown town, but they were still nearly 30 miles out. Every mile could be an eternity in the modern world. There wasn't even a bar or restaurant to be found along Route 237. So far as they could see. Thankfully, according to the map, Route 64 wasn't too far beyond the sleepy Indiana town. That would put them back on track, headed west. Laura, a college student of Asian descent, tried to slip a hand into her backpack unnoticed. "Not yet, Laura," Sheila said, frustration evident in her voice. In her previous life before the sickness, she was a librarian whose voice could cut through oak. Now, dressed in a black Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt, torn jeans, with a dirty sweater hanging loosely from her shoulders, no one would have guessed as much. "We're running out," she continued, "and I'll be damned if you eat our last can of tuna." Laura's hand left the bag indignantly. "But I'm hungry," she whined. "I know you are," Abraham interjected, "but we all are. We'll make it. We just have to support each other and share." "But you had a can all to yourself the other day," the 19-year-old retorted. Abraham sighed and massaged his shaved head with a tired hand. "That was last week, Laura, and we all had a can a day back then. This is all we've got left." Laura crossed her arms and huffed, but said no more. The 3 unlikely team members ventured further down the abandoned road. Although it had been a widely used state route only days ago, now it was a museum of burnout vehicles and decomposing bodies. Nothing left out for the scavengers persisted beyond a few bones, but Abraham had tried finding them a vehicle time and again. Often the previous occupants were still present, decomposing in their automotive coffins, and the gas had already been siphoned. This wouldn't have deterred him from checking, but the last time he'd opened the door, along with the whiff of a decomposing flesh, lunged a gurgling woman set on eating him. Thankfully, Sheila had been there to provide a double tap to the head with her 9mm. "For insurance," she said afterwards. Abraham was certainly grateful, even if she did have to spend the extra bullet. However, that wasn't what kept him from checking the cars, trucks, and vans they passed now. It was what was in the back seat. An infant struggling against the car seat's restraints, ravenously hungry and wailing at the outburst. Abraham had lost his lunch as soon as he saw its bloodshot eyes and mottled skin, refusing to go closer. Sheila gave him an appraising look, but didn't volunteer herself. That said all he needed to know. There were lines even she wouldn't cross. He often wondered what kind of librarian she would have been, certainly one he wouldn't have crossed. "What's that up there?" Laura asked, energy bolstering her steps. Abraham looked ahead where she was staring. Something was going on. Besides the farmland and periodic houses they passed, a multitude of cars were parked along the roadside ahead. What was more, the majority appeared to be in working order. Voices echoed to them, energetic shouting along with the more common growls of the undead. It was difficult to make out at nearly 100 yards away, but there appeared to be a group of living beings huddled along a fence. None seemed to be running from the sound of undead. Sheila stopped. The others followed her lead. "What is it?" she whispered, wary of people listening even this far away. Abraham shook his head. "Not sure. It looks like people, but they aren't running." "They don't sound scared," Laura offered hopefully. "Maybe they have food." Weighing their options, the potential for food outweighed the can of tuna delight the group had remaining. "Worth a look." Sheila glared at Abraham. "Look, you got a better idea?" She started to say something, but Abraham added, "One that doesn't use our ammo and draw people to our kill?" At this, her jaw clicked shut and she looked away. There may have been a pond or lake around to fish in, but they hadn't seen one in days, and the nearest water on the road map was a river that flowed right through the heart of English Indiana. "We have to at least pass them," he continued. "That doesn't mean we walk up and say hello," said Sheila, finding her voice. "It isn't like before. You of all people should know that." Abraham did know that, but some part of him latched onto the idea of community and socialization. She was right. People were scared, and scared people acted irrationally. But the other option put them another day or more away from water and food. "Well, you two can hang back while I check it out. They aren't acting like other groups we've come across. They're out and about." This seemed to gall Sheila more than the idea of walking up and saying hello. After opening, then clamping her mouth shut, she simply shook her head. Laura piped up with, "Not me, I'm going with you. They might have food and I'm not missing out on that." They both stared daggers at Abraham. Ignoring their looks, he strode toward the crowd of people shouting in the distance. As he approached, the shouts grew louder. The group of survivors were preoccupied while surrounding a chain-link fence, arms pumping in the air as though rooting for their favorite horse at the Kentucky Derby. Abraham passed vehicles lining both sides of the road, while well-groomed fields of lush grass stretched into the distance. Attached to the chain-link fence was an old one-story Depression-era house. A large white barn stood out back, painted to match. A sniper stood atop each building, but they didn't make a hostile move as the group approached. The entire area was encompassed by a traditional ranch rail fence. It was as though this small place of solace had somehow managed to persist, no matter the devastation wrought on the rest of the world. A concrete porch 2 feet high extended into the fenced yard, and on one of the posts, a large hand-painted sign was nailed outlining the value of commonly traded goods. "When food and ammo" was advertised at the top. Below that, it seemed live animals were valued highest, followed by fresh farm vegetables, canned goods, then guns and ammo. The bottom could barely be seen through the crowd. As the group stepped up to the source of cheers and boos, they were hardly noticed. The locals made room at the fence without a word as Abraham stepped forward. It was grisly, yet somehow pleasant. The front yard of the house was no more than 30 feet to the road, but a good 50 feet wide. Inside, a dozen zombies in assorted levels of decomposition fought over a terrified pink pig the size of a rotund poodle. It slipped through groping hands. Hungry growls of frustration echoed from its pursuers. They each had a number painted on the fronts and backs of their shirts. 6 were stained pink, while the other half were dingy white. A thick chain was strung horizontally a couple feet inside the fence on every side to hold the undead back from the gamblers. "I can't believe this," Laura hissed behind Abraham. "It's inhuman." A few nearby spectators overheard and glanced back, then rolled their eyes or just turned back to the action. No one bothered to comment, but their opinions were clear. There was nothing humane about how the sickness took friends and loved ones, so why concern yourself with the well-being of the undead trying to eat everyone? Or maybe she was talking about the pig. Either way, it was clear these folks were not human rights activists, not unless it was their own lives at stake. And this day and age, every day was a struggle to survive. Abraham motioned for Laura to keep her comments to herself just as the pig bounded off the chain-link fence a few feet away and sped past, squealing in terror. Cheers erupted as the nearest zombie contestants dove and missed the pork chop. Others grabbed for the animal, managing to get a leg, but it slipped from their grip time and again. Abraham was enthralled. It was like everything that happened over the last 2 years vanished in minutes. The fear and wariness that had become a never-ending daily routine was replaced by a sense of community and excitement. Even Sheila eventually squeezed in next to him while Laura stood back. It didn't take long before the pig was tackled and devoured like a pack of wolves in front of the audience. The people hooted and swore, displaying their gambling success and failure. Zombies fought to get a mouthful, pulling and jumping over the others huddled around the small corpse. Although disgusted, Abraham's stomach growled, his mouth watered. "What the hell am I thinking?" he wondered when he realized ravenous thoughts were passing through his head. To calm his unsteadiness, he told himself, "It's just the hunger speaking." A middle-aged woman in a red flannel shirt and horn-rimmed glasses stepped onto the concrete porch of the rundown house and stopped to address the crowd. Next to her sat an old man Abraham hadn't spotted before. The man's skin was like dark coffee, with wrinkles that put his age close to 70. Short, graying curls covered his head as he sat in a wooden rocking chair. The woman put her hands up, and the crowd quieted. Over the sound of eating zombies, she declared, "The winner is contestant 11. Please come to the steps to collect your winnings. Next on the docket, a greased goat. I'll be around to take bets." The crowd cheered at that announcement. The bookie patted the shoulder of the elderly man's denim jacket, grabbed her iPad, and headed for our side of the fence. The old man hardly seemed to notice, at least not enough to stop rocking. From this distance, it didn't even look like he had acknowledged her. She began tapping in bets on her iPad, going from person to person outside the fence. "What's with her?" asked Laura. Turning around, Abraham said, "She's the bookie. She's taking bets." Laura paled. "Seriously?" Sheila frowned at her. Everyone else had already grasped what was going on. Abraham sighed as he answered, "Yes," knowing what was coming. "But how could—" Laura began, her voice twice as loud and an octave higher. "Stop!" Sheila ordered, interrupting the young woman's tirade. "Look, Laura," Abraham continued, "you may not like the way the world works. Hell, I had tons of problems with things before the shit hit the fan. And back then, you could speak about it all you want. Things are different now. Anytime you rock the boat around strangers and question the way they do things, not only are you endangering your life, but ours too." He gave her a moment for his words to sink in. It helped that the tall farmer next to Abraham gave a nod of support. Laura's shoulders shrank as the sense of his words clicked into place, like the gears of a clock syncing up. "Understand?" She nodded, lips tight. Abraham overheard a woman a few places down call the bookie Charity. Soon she made it to their small group. "Placing a bet?" she asked, a dour look on her face. Abraham shook his head. "No thanks, Charity," although part of him wanted to. His eyes wandered to the short line of winners waiting patiently at the steps to the old decrepit house. There were 4. Each had taken a rusted wheelbarrow from a line of them standing against the side of the house. Now they were ready to be loaded. At the front, a young woman Laura's age was doling out the winnings, filling one wheelbarrow halfway with everything from fruits and vegetables to canned goods, a battery power drill, Glock 9mm, and 2 boxes of shotgun ammunition. Soon the first winner was wheeling his loaded wheelbarrow out to his car, a smile on his face wider than the Grand Canyon. After returning the wheelbarrow, he pulled out and headed home. Charity moved on without a word, intent on her duties, while a man in his 20s in overalls followed behind, pushing another wheelbarrow. For each transaction, he loaded the wagered goods into it and continued on like a dutiful puppy. In less than 10 minutes, the wheelbarrow was pushed up a plywood ramp and left on the porch for all to see. The young man took out the goods the elderly man pointed to and made a small pile next to the front door. There were 3 other stacks of goods from earlier events already waiting. "The house always takes a cut," Abraham mumbled. "Yep," growled the tall stranger next to him. He wore denim overalls and a 5 o'clock shadow of gray whiskers, even though it was barely noon. "They always do, but when you win." He sucked in a lungful of air. "Ooh-wee, that's a feeling you just can't pass up." Abraham didn't even realize he'd spoken aloud and was shocked when the tall man responded. However, the man's easygoing nature and friendly country accent put Abraham's fears to rest. "You new to these parts?" the man asked. Slipping back into the role he'd missed so much, Abraham embraced the simple conversational moment and leaned against the fence. "Yes, we are. Just passing through." On his other side, Sheila glared directly at Abraham, but didn't say a word. He didn't notice. "This seems like a nice place." "It is," the stranger replied. He extended a hand. Tim Martin." Abraham shook it. "Nice to meet you. I'm Abraham. This is Laura." He adjusted and motioned toward her. Tim nodded. "Nice meeting you, little lady. And this is Sheila. And you, ma'am." He put out an oversized hand. Sheila warily took it. "Good to meet you, too. How likely is it you'll win one of these matches?" Tim grinned. "More likely than you'd think. Out of about 50 different families that come, I win about once a week." It's enough to feed me and my boys. Really, it's just a way of the community to come together and share what they can. This seemed to astound Laura. Then why do it? Why not just share? Tim gave her a knowing glance, like a father who dealt with many a question just like it. And who decides who gets what and when? Laura paused and thought, ready to respond, but after a moment she settled back on her heels and said nothing. Tim nodded. Governing a group of people is much like them dead uns in there. He motioned to the zombies that had finished off the pig and were now wandering around the enclosure searching for their next meal. A few swiped at onlookers, but the fence, barbed wire, and an inner chain kept them just out of reach. Everyone wants a piece all the time. If there ain't some way of keeping them in check with a chance to get their own crack at the goods, they'll turn on you. People ain't like regular people when you get them together or stress them out. It's like they lose their minds and just get greedy. Laura nodded at this explanation. The sense of awkwardness that had permeated the air for the last few weeks, since Laura joined the group, seemed to disappear. Tim smiled. It may not be pretty, he admitted, but it works. You don't fix something if it ain't broke. Sheila's wariness seemed to diminish too. She smiled. Abraham hadn't seen such a sight the entire time he'd known her. Charity stood in front of the crowd again. She raised her arms, and the chattering crowd grew quiet. Okay, all bets are in. Round 4 begins now. A greased black and white goat was released in the enclosure, and the undead took notice immediately. They ran after the pleading goat, slipping and stumbling into the chain and fence. The line of barbed wire peeled skin from cheeks and hands, catching on clothing and ripping through whatever was left of their garments. This round took far longer, but eventually it ended the same way the first had. Charity came around taking bets for the following event, while winners collected their goods and pushed them out to their waiting car or truck. Tim bet a package of fresh fish wrapped in brown paper and twine on Zombie 6, the one he always chose. He said he'd caught them that morning. Round 5 was a poodle, and round 6, a declawed calico cat. Tim chatted with the group as the sun moved overhead. Abraham's hunger grew. Eventually, Laura piped up with, "How long do these events generally go?" Abraham hadn't even noticed she'd squeezed in on the other side of him. "Most of the day," Tim answered. "We'll cut off near dark. It'll give the people who didn't win time to head home." "So you can only win once?" Tim nodded. "Yep, keeps the peace. We do this every Saturday." As another round came and passed, Abraham noticed something. Although the entire front yard was fenced in, there was nothing separating the zombies from the 2-foot-high porch. It was open to the yard, but neither the old man or the others working the event seemed concerned. In fact, the zombies didn't even try to go near them. He was about to mention it to Tim when he noticed Charity heading back to the porch, her assistant hauling another load of goods behind her. Freshly picked ears of corn beckoned to him. Abraham bolted toward her and caught up just before she entered. "Wait, I'm betting on this one." Charity gave him an aggravated look, but pulled out her iPad and asked, "Name?" "Abraham Gomez." "Which contestant?" For a second, Abraham didn't understand her choice of words. Charity tapped her foot. "Oh, right," he said. "Contestant 6. She noted it. "Wager?" He thought for a moment. He had his pistol, but they would need that. They really only had one thing left on the list of trade goods posted to the porch. "A can of tuna delight." She gazed at him skeptically over her glasses, her face still turned down to the iPad. "That it?" Abraham nodded. "Fine," she retorted, tapping in the wager. "Add it to the load." She closed her iPad and put it back in her belt case. That gave him pause. One sec, I'll go get it." Frustrated, the bookie waved him off. "Give it to me after." With that, she escorted the load up the ramp. Abraham strode back to the group, enthusiastic and anxious to see how his luck would hold. It didn't. Round 8 was another dog, this time a Chihuahua. Zombie 12 grabbed it before any of the others could reach it. Just like that, Abraham had lost the only food they had left. He watched as the bookie made her regular announcement, then headed out the gate and straight for him. "Look, Laura, I lost," Abraham hissed. "Figured as much," Sheila retorted, having seen him bolt and make the wager. Laura said, "Wait, what did you lose?" "Our can of tuna delight," the bookie... A can of tuna delight, the bookie interjected. A can of tuna delight, the bookie interjected in her no-nonsense tone. "Please hand it over." Abraham put out his hand to Laura and waited patiently. She backed up, clutching the backpack to her chest. "Laura, hand it over." She took another step back. No. "Laura, hand it over." Sheila stepped between them. "Look, Abraham, you made your bed. Now sleep in it." "What?" "You cannot bet what isn't yours," she explained. "You didn't ask us, so no, you cannot have it." Charity looked from person to person, astonished at the dramatic turn of events. She then glared at Abraham, disgusted. "Really?" Sorry. "Fine. You accept the consequences." She spun and strode away. "Wait," he called after her. "What consequences?" In answer, she waved lazily at the hand-painted sign attached to the front porch post. Leaning over the fence to see past Tim and the others waiting for the next event, Abraham stared at the bottom. Welch equals contestant. Realizing what she meant, panic set in. His heart rate tripled. Abraham yelled, "Wait, I've got it!" He waved a hand to get Charity's attention. With a sidelong glance, he hissed, "Laura, give me the can!" Laura and Sheila stood their ground. "No," the ex-librarian demanded. "It's our food." "I need it now!" Having never seen Abraham in such a state, Laura took 2 more steps back. He pointed at the sign. "Look, this isn't the time for a morality lesson. They're going to put me in the yard." Both women were far shorter than Abraham's 6 feet and could make out nothing on the lower half. "Wait, Charity!" From the porch, she finally shouted back, "Enough, Mr. Gomez. It's too late. Step forward and take your chances." A sense of flight took hold, but just as he took a step away, Tim's iron grip captured his forearm. "No, you don't, Jacko," he hissed. "You reap what you sow." Abraham struggled to dislodge himself, but the laborer seemed made of steel. "Please," he pleaded. "It's not my fault. It was just a can of tuna." 2 more intimidating men parted from the fence and joined Tim, laughing jovially. "Aye, time to pay your dues," a bearded giant who looked as though he'd stepped out of Rowling's latest Harry Potter movie said with a laugh. He took hold of Abraham's shoulders and steered him bodily toward the gate while the others followed behind. Once through, the chain-link fence slammed shut. He was trapped. A glance back showed that every inch of the fence was covered by men and women dressed similar to Tim, in denim, flannel, or hand-me-down t-shirts. The last look he found on Sheila's face was pure disgust. Laura wouldn't even meet his eyes. Charity appeared next to him, sternly grabbing his forearm. She guided Abraham up the concrete steps to the porch like a leashed animal with no hope of escape. Submitting, he turned to gaze upon his future. Assorted wagers lined the porch in small stacks. At the other end, the old man sat rocking. "How can I be a contestant?" Abraham managed to ask, regaining his composure. I'm not undead. I'm human, just like you and him." He nodded toward the elderly man. This close, he could make out something the old man was humming. It sounded like "God Bless the USA." "Easy," Charity replied. "The animals are contestants too." She shoved him forward. Abraham teetered at the edge of the porch, dazed. "But no one ever bets on the animal," he whined. Ignoring his comment, Charity shouted, "Last round! Abraham Gomez has volunteered to go against our undefeated team of zombies!" A cheer erupted from the fence line. Abraham's stomach fell into his feet. "Taking bets now!" The bookie stepped away and continued her routine, taking bets outside the gate while the zombies milled about hungrily. Abraham stared out in a daze at the dozen creatures stumbling back and forth through the yard. He could not believe what was happening. His stomach growled in answer, and he wished he could punch it, beat it till any sound was a distant memory. It was at fault for what he'd done. He was sure of it. They only had enough tuna for a third of a can apiece this evening. He never would have made such a stupid bet if he had been thinking on a full stomach. Never. Before he knew what was happening, Charity was back on the porch, standing just a foot away from the ledge. "Wonderful," she shouted. "I don't think we've gotten that much participation in a single event in years." The crowd erupted in laughter and cheers. She raised a hand and the group quieted in anticipation. Now, without further ado, let's get it on! Abraham was pretty sure he would have lost everything he'd eaten over the last 48 hours if the bookie hadn't shoved him off the foot-high porch. The shortfall seemed endless as he took in the zombies around him. As soon as his feet hit the grass, snarls erupted. Heavy steps pounded toward him. Instinct from living through the last 2 years took over. His legs pumped. Abraham dodged and weaved. He ducked under arms, spun out of reach, and hurtled toward the fence, intent on jumping it. At the last moment, the chain and string of barbed wire came into focus. Momentary panic set in, but Abraham swerved. He continued like an elite NFL running back. 2 turns later, and the porch was within sight. A hand reached out and gripped his forearm. Flashes of Tom and the other watchers who had manhandled him a few minutes before gripped his chest, but even that was fleeting. A swift jerk pulled him free, and he sped toward the unguarded porch. A wide grin crested his lips as he leaped up onto the porch. He came to a stop next to the old man in the rocking chair and turned to check on his pursuers. His grin widened. He had been right. They wouldn't pursue him here. He had found salvation, a loophole in their rules. Thrusting 2 fists into the air, he shouted, "I win! I did it!" A groan echoed from the opposite end of the yard. Clearly, they didn't bet on me, Abraham thought, pumping his fist. A second later, something changed. The gruff hum of "God Bless the USA" had stopped. Then a creak. Before he could turn his head, 2 strong arms wrapped around him and rotting teeth chomped down on his ear, ripping it off. Abraham screamed, accompanied by a shriek from Laura in the crowd. "No, don't!" she shouted. Abraham fought to untangle himself from the creature. When he finally got a look at his assailant, all he could think was, "Please! No, please! You're a patriot!" However, that did not stop the old man from sinking his teeth into Abraham's neck and tearing it out like a rabid wolf. He crumpled to the floor, blood gushing from his head and neck. The man hunched over him, beating away Abraham's flailing arms and devouring every ounce of fresh meat he could reach. Within seconds, blood loss, ripped muscles, and shredded tendons left Abraham little recourse. His arms fell to the ground, limp. Laura turned from the sight and hid in Sheila's embrace. Tears streamed down her cheeks and onto the ex-librarian's RHCP T-shirt. "It will be okay," Sheila mumbled reassuringly. "He's better off now." But, Laura said through sobs, "But it won't." "Yes, it will. Give it time. This happens. It was his choice. We can't make the right decisions for others. We just try to do the best we can. It's a cruel world we live in now." Laura pushed back and stared up at the woman. "But you don't understand. I couldn't give him the tuna because I already ate it." Sheila's eyes went wide with shock. Thanks again for joining us at Story Glimpse Season 1. I'm Weston Kincade, best-selling author. And if you'd like to hear about more of our stories, also instructional videos about this very story that I just read, click the bell, subscribe, and follow us. And let us know what you think in the comments below. So thanks again for coming. Have a great day.